Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Aviary Attorney Definitive Edition for the Nintendo Switch. Before I get into the main review, I want to talk about the differences between the original version and the Definitive Edition, just in case you're wondering if you should double dip. There's not really a whole lot to talk about here. The Definitive Edition adds a new Extras menu where you can view the various achievements, play the card game Jacques Noir whenever you want, apologies if I butchered that pronunciation, listen to the music, as well as hear which of the pieces were inspired by real French symphonies, and view a gallery, which I still haven't unlocked, and I don't really know how. There's also an option to enable dyslexic font, which I'm not dyslexic, so I didn't really mess around with this too much, but from what I could tell from the little bit that I tested, it seems like it makes the font significantly bigger and a slightly different style of writing, so that it's a little bit harder to mix up the words like dyslexic people have a tendency to do. Now on to the main game. You might be thinking that Aviary Attorney is a ripoff of Ace Attorney, and it's pretty clear that the team was definitely inspired by Capcom's collection. However, this game sets itself apart in quite a lot of unique ways. For starters, it has a really interesting art style. The entire game is presented in sepia tone, which for those of you that don't know that terminology means everything is various shades of brown and white, kind of like how the Wizard of Oz started out. I'm guessing the reason why they chose this art style is because the game takes place during the 19th century, so they wanted you to feel like you were really a part of that time period. I personally am not a huge fan of this style, but I can get that they were trying to go for an atmospheric setting, so I'll give them a pass for that. It's also very possible to fail the courtroom sections, albeit it has a very roundabout way of saying that. So, to clarify, you start out by going through an investigation phase, and during this investigation, you're given a list of the various places that you need to investigate. However, you're also told that you have a certain amount of days until the trial starts, and certain locations will have a clock icon next to them, which means that a day will pass after you're finished investigating there. Once you're at a location, you have basically two options. You can talk to whoever is there, and you can move the cursor around to see if you can find an object that you can use as evidence in the courtroom trial. This is much easier to do than the Ace Attorney series, because there will be a border around everything that you can investigate, and once you've clicked on something, that border will disappear, so you'll know that you've investigated everything that you need to do. When you talk to people, you'll often be given the option of how to respond in conversation. Most of the time, it just offers slightly different dialogue, and sometimes you even have an option of getting achievements for what you say. However, you really want to be careful as you get later in the game, as sometimes this can make or break your experience depending on what you say. More on that later. Once you get to the courtroom sections, it presents itself very similarly to the Ace Attorney series, with not a whole lot of regard to actual legal processes, more so trying to go for silly and fun over trying to be a realistic courtroom simulator. When the witness gives their testimony, instead of shifting through everything that they have to say, you'll just be given the whole testimony in this big paragraph of sorts, and then certain phrases will be underlined. Then you'll click on that underlined phrase and will be able to ask a question to clarify, oh, what do you mean by that? Now, there are irrelevant lines of questioning, and the jury will complain if you get something wrong. Yes, unlike most of the Ace Attorney series, there actually is a jury in this game. Now, the jury is very picky, as I just said earlier. If your questioning doesn't really have a huge bearing on the case and is more of just nitpicking the witness's words, then the jury will give you a strike against you. There's no visible indicator of this, but I'm sure it's pretty obvious when you're just messing up too much. And eventually the prosecutor will just say, oh, okay, you've dawdled on long enough. Now, for the first two cases, this game is actually very forgiving. If you fail enough, the game will usually find a way to weasel you out of the situation so that you don't technically get a game over. It's very unsatisfying to do this though, as even if you technically won by some very clever wording, you still feel like you could have done more. And that's why you really have to maximize where you go and what you say in the investigations, because you might know what you need to do, but you didn't do the right thing in the investigations, so you didn't get the proper evidence. Now, if you do, that's terrible wording, the investigations correctly, and you do have all of the evidence that you need, usually the contradictions are very easy to spot. This is more or less a beginner's Ace Attorney, and it definitely is not very challenging at all. However, that all changes by the time you get to the final case, as depending on how you play out the final trial, it leads into 3 different endings, and these endings are very different from each other. The gameplay and the sequence of events feels like entirely different realities, and you'll definitely want to get all 3, as each different branch gives you more perspectives on the overarching storyline and helps you sort of fill in the blanks more. So if you're a lore completionist, you'll definitely want to give all of these a try. I also think the writing is a spectacular highlight of this game. Usually it's very clear what you need to do and what is going on in the case. And even though there's a lot of French terminology that half of the time I couldn't even pronounce what they were saying, I have heard that it's very accurate to the actual places during the time period. The game does do a couple of modern references here and there, such as referencing Facebook and Twitter, which cracked me up, as well as the banter generally being pretty lighthearted and goofy. I really like the dynamic between the main lawyer, J.J. Falcon, and his assistant Sparrow, as Falcon tries to be super serious and Sparrow's more of the comedian, so it has that straight man, funny man humor that Japan is known for, which you also might know from how the Kid Icarus Uprising game turned out. And the game generally does a good job of mixing itself up between the high-stakes story versus just the silly moments in between. And by silly, I mean sometimes it can be as ridiculous as trying out a new invention that clearly hasn't been tested because it's only the 19th century, and then somehow using that to make a difference. I think the biggest problem I had with Aviary Attorney is that the story wasn't particularly groundbreaking. I think it probably attributed mainly to the fact that the game is so short. You'll probably be able to beat this in about 1 to 3 hours if you know what you're doing. Maybe 5 if you're really struggling on some of the logic. But you really shouldn't. As long as you have all of the evidence that you need and you didn't miss a beat during the investigations, it should be pretty easy to get what you need. However, by the time you get to the 3rd case, there are different variables for how the case can play out, so definitely don't feel discouraged if you make a mistake right away, as the game will compensate you for that. Overall, despite my nitpicks about the story and how it's nowhere near as great as the legendary Ace Attorney series, I still think this is worth a buy, as not only do you get some good courtroom antics, but you also get a chance to play a card game on the side. And this card game is basically just Baccarat, just called by a French name, and you can use this to get more money, which you can use during the investigations. Admittedly, I never got to a point where I needed to play the card game, so you could say it's entirely optional, as I always had more than enough money than what I needed. But it is a nice change of pace, in case you're tired of all the pointing and clicking and lots of reading. I also think you'll really like the soundtrack of this game, as most of the music is fully orchestrated, and in fact, a lot of the music is based on actual French symphonies. And if you look in the jukebox, you'll be able to tell which ones were original compositions and which ones were based on existing recordings. Which is a really nice touch, because this is a 19th century game, so having pieces that were during the Romantic era definitely help sell that atmosphere that I told you that the graphics try to convey. So if you really like great music, a great sense of humor, a more beginner's approach to the Ace Attorney series, and generally just really good writing, then I highly recommend this game. Don't allow my nitpicks to prevent you from picking up a nice, clever take on, oh, I've said the word Ace Attorney enough. Just pick it up if you really want to get into the spiky-haired lawyers games. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if there was something I missed, if you need clarity, if you have any questions, etc. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and let's not have actual birds be attorneys. We'd all be messed up if that happened. Bye!